Velkommen til den 10. utgaven av Petroganda-podden. Jeg heter Julie Forchhammer.
Og jeg heter Erlend Eggen.
Erlend Eggen. Hvordan står det til med helsa di i dag?
Du, det går, jeg synes det går ganske bra. Sprek og rask, ikke veldig syk, ingen forkjølelser, ingen høstforkjølelser. Hva med
Er du
deg?
vel... Du, min helse er også bra. Jeg merker at jeg ikke er plaget av luftforurensning, for eksempel. Så,
Som
så,
veldig mange er.
som veldig mange er. For vi har laget en sånn spesialepisode av podcasten vår, og i dag så skal det handle om... Tada!
Helse. Olje og gass og helse. Et tema som vi har brukt alt for lite tid på, og tenkt alt for lite på, av sikkert veldig mange grunner. Det er ikke en diskusjon som vi er veldig vant med å ta i Norge.
Nei, og når vi har snakket om det, så er det jo ofte sånn, vi snakker om ekstremvær og ja, at klimakrisen er til skade for noen. Men å konkretisere det ned i helseproblemer, i ulike typer kreft, i lungeproblemer, i fosterskader, i det hele tatt,
Fra vogge til grav.
der sa du det. For her i september, der kom det en ny rapport fra The Global Climate and Health Alliance, som er en global klima- og helseallianse, som representerer mer enn 200 organisasjoner i 125 land, med til sammen 46 millioner helsearbeidere. Og de kom med rapporten From Cradle to Grave om helseskadene ved fossile brensler. Og jeg var så heldig her, og fikk satt meg ned sammen med Shweta Narayan fra India, som er kampanjeleder i Organisasjonen, og som har laget denne rapporten, eller hatt ansvar for den. Så vi snakket sammen i ca. 50 minutter om helseskader ved fossile brennstoffer, og også om Norge, Erlend. For Norge har gjort noe kjempelurt når det gjelder olje og helse, Erlend.
Ja, altså vi har jo snakket bitte litt grann om det på en måte, at vi antageligvis har klart å eksportere alle de helseutfordringene som blir nevnt i denne rapporten ut av landet på et eller annet slags vis. Altså vi er en sterkt medvirkende aktør til at fossilt brensel brennes over hele verden, i tillegg til selvfølgelig klimaendringer og alle de helseutfordringene det medfører. Men her hjemme så har vi på en måte beveget oss raskt i retning av elektrifisering. Vi har sikkert enormt sterkt regelverk knyttet til de ansatte ute på hver enkelt plattform. Altså vi har jo hørt om enkelte helseutfordringer blant oljeansatte på en måte, men det er kanskje ikke den utfordringen vi snakker mest om i offentligheten i hvert fall.
Nei, så har vi jo tatt ganske godt vare på, altså HMS-betingelsene for petroleumsindustrien i Norge er jo strengere enn mange andre steder, som jo nå vi smykker oss med. Men Shweta drar oss igjennom alle helseutfordringene som er både ved de som jobber med disse tingene. Og vet du hva, Erlend? Hun forteller det jo sånn helt fra sin egen barndom, hvor hun vokste opp i en liten industriby i India, og hennes far kom hjem hver dag med masse kullgruvestøv på klærne. Så hun har jo en helt sånn nesten fysisk egen erfaring med helsekonsekvensene av fossile brensler, som jo veldig få her hjemme kan si. Vi vet at det skjer noe ute i Nordsjøen, og så skjer det litt på land, men vi har jo ikke den erfaringen som alle de med landbaserte utvinningsinstallasjoner har rundt omkring.
Men sånn av nysgjerrighet, tror du det er en grunn til at helseutfordringer knyttet til olje og gass blir snakket så lite om som det gjør? Altså, har det noe med nærheten Altså, hvis du, hvis du for eksempel jobber i oljenæringa, da, og du har gjort det i generasjoner, det da vanskelig å ta det opp fordi det blir så nærme, på en måte? Eller hva tenker du?
Shweta snakker i hvert fall mye om hvilken historiefortelling som det har vært rundt fossile brensler og oljenæringen. Det her med at de gagner lokalsamfunnene. At det er bra for oss. At det er bra for menneskeheten å utvikle oss. Det er bra for byer og bygder og arbeidstakere å ha den typen sektorer og industrier inne. Og det er jo det vi ser i Norge også, hvor sterk den historiefortellingen er. Så Shweta kommenterer blant annet på Aker BP, som her i forrige uke, hvor sjefen gikk ut og sa at han ble spurt om hva han mente om at 3 nye oljefelt kunne føre til 100 000 ekstra døde mennesker, rett og slett, på grunn av varmeheterelaterte dødsfall. Og hvor han sa at jo, men vår rolle vi er bare et lite selskap, det betyr ikke så mye hva vi gjør, og hun kommenterer på en del sånne norske ting som blir sagt da, i forhold til skadevirkningene ved olje. Og hun snakker også om samarbeidet til den norske kraftforening, som jo jobber mye med Aker og Aker BP på kampanjer sammen. Så hun,
ikke det litt sånn, vi har sett flere rapporter i løpet av det siste året som går nettopp på helsekonsekvensen, eller ikke mange dødsfall hver enkelt oljeutbygging eller fossilinstallasjon liksom kan forårsake. Det er en ny dimensjon ved hele debatten, tenker jeg. Og at den reaksjonen til Aker-sjefen vitner om at han rett og slett ikke har tatt inn over seg den reelle konsekvensen av hvert nye oljefelt.
Det Shweta forklarer bra i forhold til det her, er også det her med det som ble kalt for sacrifice zones. Altså de steder i verden hvor man legger industri, eller hvor vi dumper alle fast fashion-klærne våre. Altså det er områder i verden som vi utsetter for utrolig mye smerte på så mange måter, og vi synes det er greit. Og når Aker BP-sjefen sier at 100 000 dødsfall, men det blir jo lokale arbeidsplasser i Harstad, på en måte. At,
det er fremdeles, at det er lov, og at det er mulig å reflektere på den måten, er jo oppsiktsvekkende. Jeg synes det høres ut som når folk og journalister og alle som kan sette det i et kritisk lys får begynt å tenke seg om, da tror jeg vi kommer til å utvikle den samtalen ganske raskt, for det er et ganske merkelig resonemang å holde 100 000 dødsfall opp mot noen litt sånne enkle utviklingstrekk i et lite lokalsamfunn i Norge, og at det på en måte skal veie opp. Nei, det er ganske søkt.
Det er ganske søkt. Og så en ting som vi også må bli flinkere til å snakke om, er det her med å huske på å omtale oljen og gassen som skadelige produkter. Og når vi snakker om en energiomstilling, at vi kanskje heller skal bli flinkere til å si at vi skal fase ut olje og gass. For jeg bruker jo ofte ord det grønne skiftet eller en energiomstilling. Men det er jo ganske diffust, og det kan fortsatt bety at olje og gass er en del av det, så lenge man har de her falske løsningene som er karbonfangst eller hydrogen eller et eller annet som oljebransjen er flink til å selge inn som løsninger. Men at vi må begynne å omtale olje og gass på linje med asbest eller tobakk eller den typen produkter da, som vi har sett nødt til å fase ut og forby reklame for, og så videre.
Så vi har jobbet hardt for å kvitte oss med over flere 10 år. Ja, nei, det er helt sant. Da kommer jo det sånne rapporter som den her veldig godt med. Det blir veldig spennende å høre samtalen din med Shweta.
Hun helt strålende, og vi setter bare i gang samtalen med Shweta. Og så hvis dere hører litt ymse lyder, så er det noen Shweta er veldig glad i hunder, så jeg tror det er hundene hennes som driver og er litt utålmodige på noen tidspunkter. Og så er det også en liten sånn klirrelyd som gir litt god indisk sånn contentum bakgrunnslyd til intervjuet. Så da vet du det. Men der håper jeg at du beholder din gode helse, Erlend, og så hører vi mer på hva Shweta har å si. Welcome to this recording and interview with someone I had the joy of listening to last year and have followed for the last year. And welcome to you, Shweta Narayan.
Thank you, Julie.
I would like to start by asking you, I heard a TED talk you did this morning where you said there cannot be healthy people on a sick planet. Should we start there?
Indeed. Absolutely. And thank you so much for hosting me here, Julie. It's my absolute pleasure and honor. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the TED Talk I gave was in 2021, just before COP26. Was it Glasgow? Yeah, I'm kind of losing count now. And yeah, as the title suggests, you cannot have healthy people on a sick planet. When we think about health, we tend to silo it down into individuals' health within our hospital systems. But I was through this talk, I was trying to break down those silos and make people understand that people's health, planetary health, ecological health is intertwined. You cannot have one without another. And this I mean, again, to be very honest, this is a very logical thing. If you don't have clean air to breathe, if you don't have clean water to drink, if you don't have safe food, you're not going to be healthy. No matter what interventions you do, if you are not looking at your forests and your air and your water, one cannot survive or thrive. And this is indigenous wisdom. Somehow, the way we think today of policies, we break things down, we individualize it, we silo it, and as a result, we are in the mess that we are in. So this was an attempt to break those silos and understand that health is much more holistic. It's much more dependent on actions in different sectors, and everything, all interventions at all levels will collectively contribute in making people and environment healthy and thriving.
Oh, thank you for that, Shweta. You're working for your campaign lead at the Global Climate and Health Alliance. And last week you released a report called Cradle to Grave, the health toll of fossil fuels. And we'll get back to that, but I would like to place you in a setting because people can maybe hear some dogs. Is there maybe some wind chimes chiming? Where are you? Where are you coming from, Shweta? Because when I heard you speak last year, you told me about your experience with fossil fuels and power when you were a child.
Yes. So I've had a pretty interesting journey, I must say. I was born and brought up in eastern India, in a small industrial town. So I grew up surrounded by steel plants and coal mines and power plants. So as I often joke and tell people, I come from the belly of the beast. My father used to work at the steel plant, and every evening when he would come back home, he would be covered in coal dust. So for me, the experience of pollution has begun at home with my family, and with pollution entering my home and becoming a permanent fixture in my own life, and the subsequent health impacts. Not to miss that. When I grew up, I went to college in a different city. I went for my higher studies in a completely different city. So I traveled a lot, and eventually I started working with fence line communities in South India. around, and these are people, communities living around polluting facilities, industries, in remote villages. And my work was primarily to support them in evidence generation, evidence of harm, evidence of pollution, so that they and their lived experience can become data that regulatory agencies couldn't refute and need to investigate. In my due course of working in South India, I eventually settled, and this is where I am speaking to you right now. I live in a very beautiful small village in the hills of South India in the Western Ghats. It's quite remote. You will hear dogs because there are a lot of dogs in our family, and we live in the outskirts of the forest. So we are fortunate enough to have clean air and beautiful surrounding around us.
I think your upbringing in a community affected by the coal plants and the steel plants, especially the coal plants, is very different from Norwegians raised in a community also based on fossil fuel money, but with the fossil fuel plants out at sea, so they never see it. But Shweta, I think, is it maybe your earrings that is making a sound?
Okay, I can try to remove it. And let's see if this is better.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you. That was but they were beautiful and it was a nice contentum. But thank you for that. That was true in Indian contentum. Great Indian background sound. So, but tell me where you are now, because now you're working as a campaign lead at the Global Health and Climate Alliance. What is that?
So, Global Climate and Health Alliance is a consortium or a network of over 200 health organizations. And these organizations work at the intersection of climate and health. So bringing health to the climate space and climate to the health space. As the name suggests, we have members from around the world, over 125 countries. And collectively, our members' reach within our network represents over 46 million health voices around the world. We are a small secretariat, and as most secretariats, we serve our members, and we also build their capacity and their capability to be effective climate and health advocates, bring the health trust and leadership into the conversation, and also the health narrative in decision making. So my job as campaign lead is to support our members and build their capacity in advocacy, also provide them evidence that they can use effectively in their climate and health advocacy, either at local level or at international level.
So tell me, why haven't we been speaking about climate and health issues for the last 20, 30 years? Why is this a bit new to me? I know it's not new to you, but in the global climate communication scheme of things, it's still a bit new, or am I uneducated?
No, I wouldn't say you are uneducated. I think that it is new, and it just shows that how much work we have to do in order to mainstream health in climate conversations. I don't think that there is a lack of realization how important the health argument is. It's personal. One thing that you live in Norway, I live in India, but one common concern that we have is our health, our children's health, our community health. So health is this narrative that can bring people together, irrespective of their origins or race or their beliefs. This is a shared responsibility, and I think while and I again jokingly say that health is everybody's concern but nobody's priority, because then once we it's a common concern, it's a shared concern, and then everything else that we do often take precedence, and somehow health gets left behind. And Global Climate and Health Alliance's efforts have been to mainstream health and health leadership, and I mean, if I have to reflect on your statement, what you just shared, it feels like we have a lot of work to do to make sure that, people connect the dots and people advocate through the lens of health. I also feel that there's been a systematic effort by the industry to diminish or fragment the health impacts. Because, once you start challenging them on the health argument, there's very little for them to respond to. And you mentioned Cradle to Grave report. I was looking at some of the industry response to the report, and it was interesting because every response ended with saying, "Of course, we know that fossil fuels harms health, but they couldn't argue. They couldn't argue the health impacts." And that's our power, and we have not. I mean, we need to leverage that power even more. So there's a bit of work to do, and there is a bit of conscious siloing that vested interests invest in to keep the health message remote, because that they know that would hurt them the most.
So this is a report, Cradle to Grave: The Health Toll of Fossil Fuels and the Imperative for a Just Transition. And I would, of course, recommend people to check it out and check out main findings. And I'll link to it in the liner notes. We'll get into some of the key findings. But you have been working with this report for a year, I think, Shweta?
Yes.
What were your surprises during this work? What was the biggest shocks to you? Was it all common knowledge to you already, or did you have some, oh my gosh, moments during the work?
Well, I would say that a lot of it was known, definitely. And that was the intention, that some of us who've been working on at the intersection of climate and health, and especially looking at fossil fuels as the root cause of the climate crisis, were aware of the range of the health problems that we can see from fossil fuels operations. And yet, the sheer magnitude of evidence that we found, and I'll come to that in a bit in terms of like what we have examined in the report, but just the evidence that we found once we started looking was overwhelming, I would say, even for somebody like me. And I thought that, I had a pretty good idea. My colleague who has led the science, the evidence part of the research along with me, she was surprised at the number of times cancers pops up, and you would be surprised too. And in fact, I recently read somebody on LinkedIn who has read our report and was shocked by it, and actually did a count of the number of times cancers comes up, and said, I think 122 times in the report at least. Mm. So those are some of the deeply shocking part. What was interesting as we go into the report, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, was people for the first time connecting the social and the economic model of the fossil fuel industry to health harms. That was quite an eye opener for a lot of people who read the report.
Could you explain that a bit? What do you mean by that?
Well, so there is the pollution part of it, right? Like there is the pollution part of it. There's the carbon emissions part of it that triggers and that further drives the climate crisis. But more importantly, there is also the model of operation for fossil fuel industry, where they systematically there've been cases of human rights violation, forceful displacement of indigenous populations from their land, labor violations of lax environmental laws in different countries, bribery cases, gender-based violence, corruption. That behavior or that model of operation, be it socially or economically, has a very tangible health impact. And it cannot be ignored from a health lens, because both it manifests in physical harm and also in terms of mental health crisis. So that was something that for the first time people started connecting. And there are studies that we found of World Bank where they have shown that places that have fossil fuel infrastructure have high levels of domestic violence, substance abuse, alcoholism, trafficking, sexual case violation, violence against people. There are testimonies of indigenous community leaders in the US who have talked about increased violence, and especially sexual and gender-based violence on indigenous women in places where there are pipelines. It can go on and on forever. And that we felt was very, very important to connect to the pollution and other harms.
In the report, you use the term sacrifice zones, which is a really, really strong term. Would you like to elaborate? How do you define a sacrifice zone? What is it?
So, as the name suggests, and this is a very perverse kind of mentality. So in the report, you will see that while we have looked at the evidence, we have seen a pattern of that evidence in terms of who are most vulnerable or who are most harmed. And these are communities that have less social, economic, or political power. So they're socially, economically, and politically marginalized communities. And this pattern is true for around the world. So it doesn't matter whether you are in the US or in India, if you're socially, politically, or economically marginalized, you're more likely to be located near these polluting facilities, and you are more likely to be in the harm's way. So in the US, you'll see the Black, Brown, Hispanic community that is, and working class that is located, or that all the toxic and harmful industries are located around those communities. In India, it would be people from marginalized caste and class who will face the highest burden. This is just an example. These geographies are often termed as sacrifice zones because, and this was shocking to me, that we are willing to sacrifice somebody's lives, somebody's right to clean air, clean water, healthy environment, right to a future, a healthy, thriving future, for the supposedly larger good. So these are places, in the eyes of policymaker, they have already accepted that these industries are going to pollute, and somebody has to pay the price. And that somebody will be somebody who is socially, economically, and politically marginalized. So that effectively is what it's a very perverse sense of planning, where it's okay to sacrifice somebody's life for supposedly the larger good.
No, we'll come back to that later. So thank you for your reflections on this, Shweta. Let's move forward to some of the bodily harms from fossil fuels, and talk about some key findings there. Do you want to talk about age, the different life cycles, or should we go?
We can go with this thing, because we looked at three major things when it comes to chemical harms and pollution harms from fossil fuel industry. We looked at the entire life cycle of the fossil fuel industry itself. So from exploration to extraction, refining, consumption, and disposal. And we have found that throughout that life cycle. So often people think that, where the fossil fuels are being refined or combusted is the point of harm. That's not true. Every stage of the fossil fuel industry, in terms of its life cycle, is known to hurt and harm people. And so again, from exploration, extraction cases to generating power, powering vehicles, or even disposal, when the industry runs out its life, and there is waste, or there is abandoned sites where there were extraction, we have seen that there is harm that continues. Another thing that is very important at this stage to also remember, that some of and a lot of the chemicals that are emitted in the process, while they harm people as they're being emitted, they have the capacity to stay in the environment for decades. So even if the factory stops operation, doesn't mean that those chemicals disappear. And that means that they have the power to harm and hurt people for over generations. And this is absolutely important from the point of policymakers, because often you think of policies during the 20-30 year period of the industry, but in case, and the evidence that we found points that your policymaking has to think of generations, sometimes in terms of in monitoring human impact, second and third generation also. So that's the time frame we are talking about, and that's the cost that we need to factor in when we are making these decisions. So that's the industrial life cycle. Then we have looked at the parallel human life cycle. Again, the question becomes, at what stage are human beings more vulnerable? And again, our data pointed out that there is no stage where we are not vulnerable. So before birth, at the fetal stage, there are risks. We have found risks in children, adolescent, in adulthood, especially among pregnant women, and until the age of death, till the stage of death among elderly. Every human life stage is vulnerable and has been impacted by the emissions from fossil fuels. And again, here you have to understand another thing, is that the impact sometimes may happen during exposure as a child, but the effects will manifest only at a certain age, especially with reproductive damage. So you could be exposed to endocrine disruptors and reproductive harming chemicals at the age of at the stage of childhood, but it's only when when children attain puberty and where they need, or their reproductive system starts to function, that the impact will be shown, because the damage has happened due to exposure in childhood. So the impacts are sometimes delayed. And we are seeing this again increasingly in a lot of fence line communities, where women report about and report about delay onsets of puberty, or and we have had cases in India, for example, in some of the communities that I've worked in, where women have attained their puberty at the age of 25. And this is because of the exposure of the harming chemicals at early stage, which only manifests and shows up at the stage where you're, in that life stage. So that's the human life cycle parallel. And just sort of to crystal down in terms of human body, and I would quote a very famous lung surgeon from India who would explain this. There's no part of human body that is not affected because of fossil fuel harms. So every part of human body, be it your brain, your liver, your kidneys, your lungs, your bloodstream, or your reproductive system, every part of the human body is affected because of fossil fuel pollution. And again, that's something we found very extensively in the report.
This is massive, and it's a lot of information, and it's a lot of things to get your head around. I often say that fossil fuels does more harm than tobacco did, and it kills more people every year than tobacco does today. Is that correct? Can I say that? Do we know that is true, or is it? Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely true. And in fact, during the launch of our event, Dr. Maria Neira, who was the former head of the Department of Public Health at the World Health Organization, was also at the panel. And she reflected that, she often thinks of fossil fuels as the new tobacco. So the tobacco analogy is absolutely correct. I mean, and if you think of air pollution alone, which is one of the impacts of burning of fossil fuels, air pollution annually causes at least 7 million premature deaths every year. This is WHO's own estimate. So that's just one aspect of the fossil fuel harm that we're talking about. So definitely your analogy is accurate.
Wow. How do we do the transition to talk about fossil fuels not as energy anymore, but basically as a harmful product, like we do with tobacco or asbestos or other thing? How do we start that process? Or you have started it, but how can people like me who are working with climate issues, how can we amplify this message?
Well, I think everybody can amplify this message, and that's the purpose of making this report accessible to making the evidence through this report accessible to around the world. I think we really need to understand the scale, the scope, the depth and spread of the harm that our communities are facing. Sometimes we stay at a distance and we don't know what's happening, but making the evidence accessible, making people's lived experience, their own experience of harm accessible and relatable to people around the world is absolutely important. And that's the first step in making people realize or connect the dots. People in the fence line community understand the harm that they are seeing, understand the harm, experience the harm more than the benefits. And it's for us to kind of ensure that those messages and those voices reach every part of the world. And it serves as a wake-up call for communities around the world to do something.
I'd love to hear your advice on how we can use a report like this in Norway, because we saw the life cycle of fossil fuels and where the harms come. And when it comes to vehicles and electricity, we have only electric vehicles these days, basically. In July, I think the new cars that were sold were like 99.6% electric. Our electricity in Norway comes from hydropower. So we are exporting all our harm. We are one of the biggest oil and gas exporters in the world, but we manufacture it out at sea so no one sees it, and then we export it so we don't see the harm it causes. How can we connect this health crisis to what is happening in Norway, to something that has given our country so much wealth? But yeah.
It's a very interesting challenge that you mentioned, Julie, but I would say that there are many ways in which to connect, even if the harm is not immediately felt. But I would also think that the coastal communities, connecting with them in Norway would probably, I mean, I'm curious, and I would like to inquire more about their own experiences of living, on the front lines, so to speak, because most of the refining and the extraction and the exploration happens at the sea. But solidarity is something for that. You don't have to have this first-hand experience of harm. There is evidence that we see, but in Africa, in South Asia, in Latin America, again. We've made an attempt in the report to bring that evidence and bring those voices through this report to the world. Understanding, learning, exploring what harms that people can see in those communities, and lending solidarity. If there are Norwegian oil and gas companies that are producing harm somewhere else, holding them accountable in your regions, in your courts, can be the best way to lend solidarity, because that, and I've seen that, especially the case that comes to my mind is holding Shell accountable for its environmental harms in Nigeria, and the accountability process that communities undertook was in the UK. So there are ways in which companies from Europe or from the global north, who are known to pollute and harm people in remote countries, in other countries outside their own places of establishment, there are ways to hold them accountable through government pressure, through courts, and accountability, and enforcing the accountability mechanisms that are more supposedly more stronger in those regions than other parts of the world. So there's definitely a way to lend solidarity.
Norway has, of course, been involved in Nigeria as well until quite recently, and many other countries around the world in the global south, global majority. You were mentioning courts. These days, there's a big court case in Norway with Greenpeace and Nature News trying to stop 3 new oil installations. And last week in court, the boss from Aker BP, one of our major oil companies, he was presented with the facts that these 3 new installations could cause 100,000 extra deaths due to heat-related incidents, and what he thought about that. And he basically just said that, oh no, but our emissions are small in the grand scheme of things. And our responsibility as an oil company is to deliver oil and gas at a low cost and with as few emissions as possible. And then he finished by saying, and then, of course, we all consume energy, so we should all feel a little bit guilty.
Oh my God. So there are many things, many problematic things in this statement, but I'll focus on 2 things. When somebody says, and especially an oil company boss says, that in the grand scheme of things, our contribution is few, he's basically trying to minimize the 1,000 extra deaths that will happen because of his operation. Now, I want to understand, and this is exactly the whole understanding and framing of sacrifice zones are. As long as those deaths are somebody else's family, somebody else's child, it's okay to have those deaths. That's pretty much what he's saying. He's saying that it's okay for 1,000 more people to die for us to do what we're doing. 100,000 more. Sorry, 100,000. And these are not numbers. These are lives. These are dreams. These are families that will be destroyed in the process. And to normalize that is a huge problem. How can you normalize the death of your own child where you're not even responsible for that death, or your family member, or your loved ones? So I think that's a very despicable statement to make. And that's the mentality of sacrifice zones, that somebody else, in the grand scheme of things, somebody else will pay the price. So that's one thing. The second thing about problematic about this really problematic intervention is this shared sense of guilt. Energy use choice is not an individual responsibility or choice. We all need energy. Fossil fuel industries knew about the consequences of their oil and gas production and their impact on climate decades ago. And they continued to keep us entrenched in these models of dependency. They obstructed decisions. They obstructed policies that could transition us out of our fossil fuel entrenchment into clean, renewable, healthy energy. They stopped it. They deliberately stopped it. Now, to blame us for the energy choice with the limited options that we have is absolutely trying to get rid of their own wrongful act. And it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable with the knowledge and the influence that they've had to blame individuals for that choice. And that cannot be, that just cannot be acceptable anywhere. That must be rejected.
Thank you, Shweta, for that, for this reflection. And I worked with climate issues for many years with the culture sector, and I'm not ashamed, but I worked with this issue for so many years before I understood that the reason we haven't solved the climate crisis is because the fossil fuel industry is stopping us from solving it, and they have been stopping us for decades. And it's not because I'm a bad person or you a bad person or we can't think great solutions. We are actively being stopped. But I'd like to mention one more example from you when you're rolling on Aker BP, because they have been working with the Norwegian Cancer Society a few times. Lately, last week on a folk cancer campaign with the Youth Cancer Association. So that's one thing. But earlier this year, Aker BP released a statement on LinkedIn saying this year's campaign to the Cancer Society is on and it's great. And then the Cancer Society commented on yeah, we love this campaign and yeah. And then I had to comment on LinkedIn and I was like, really, Cancer Society, do you think that an industry who is killing more people than tobacco is a great sector to work with? And I would just like to share the answer I got from the Cancer Society, how the ARCA companies have been contributing for several years with great commitment and expertise and money for important cancer research. They're very patient and they're very grateful for that. And it's important things the oil company has contributed with, research and progress in cancer treatment. We need everyone to join in a great effort. Everyone, with the exception of the tobacco industry, is welcome to contribute. We need that and all those who need cancer treatment now and in the future. Greetings, Henriette from Norwegian Cancer Society.
Well, this just shows how much work we have to do in making a health community understand the impacts of fossil fuels. I would say that. I was mentioning about this report. If cancer shows up 122 times in the report, that means this is something that cancer societies around the world should take notice. And I wanted to reflect on this. You had used an analogy of can we compare fossil fuels to tobacco? Yes, we can. And also, if you look at their playbook of obstruction, if you look at their playbook of delay and denial, it's not new. It's the tobacco playbook. So there are more than one ways in which definitely fossil fuels and tobacco are more of the same in terms of their impacts and their behavior. In fact, fossil fuels, as Dr. Maria Nera also reflected in her remarks during the webinar, is not only the new tobacco, it's worse than tobacco. So my only response to this LinkedIn post that you shared is that it just makes me more determined to reach out to health communities and health associations around the world to share with them the grave findings in our report and work with them to ensure that they don't end up cleaning up, I would say, the harmful behavior of the fossil fuel industry. They need to understand who they're collaborating with, and after that, make that choice. They need to have all the information before they decide on collaborations.
If there's someone in Norway listening to this, I'd like to inform there is a doctors' climate action network. It's called Legenes Klimakultur, and I'll post the link in the liner notes. And they are working on health issues regarding to climate. And so if you're a health professional in Norway, there are a network you can join. Also, just I think it was last year or the year before, where the Red Cross signed a huge sponsorship deal with Equinor, our biggest state-owned oil company, for 2 million euros a year, because then they were able to help more in extreme weather incidents around the world. So they got oil money to fund their emergency work, which is also, yeah.
Well, Julie, it is depressing, I would say, to hear these kind of updates. But I just want to share an update that is hopeful and uplifting. That earlier this year, we launched a campaign called "Break the Fossil Influence," where we worked and we are working with health organizations and ensuring and working with the health organizations to ensure that their procurement practices for their PR and ad agencies is fossil free. And there is a commitment, Break the Fossil Influence commitment, that health organizations signed up. So in May this year, on the sidelines of the World Health Assembly, we launched this campaign with 30 health organizations from around the world who made the commitment that they will not associate with any PR or ad agency that has association with fossil fuel industry, or has been involved or is involved in greenwashing the fossil fuel industry's behavior. And that was a huge moment for us, because this is the first time in industry, the health industry has made its stand quite clear on fossil fuel associated PR and ad agencies. What was even more uplifting was that this happened in May with 30 signatories. I'm so pleased to inform that today we are in September and we have 75 health organizations from around the world who have signed that commitment. And this is a growing momentum. So while, yes, the challenges exist and there is a lot of work that we have to do, there are also moments of hope and leadership that we can see from the health industry and health community, which will show us the way forward, that will be in favor of health and justice.
Thank you for sharing this, Shweta. I know that Doctors Without Borders is one of the organizations who have signed this pledge. So this would mean if Doctors Without Borders in Norway, Leger Uten Grenser, if they were to sign a new advertising agency or a creative PR agency, they would have to check with this agency first and say, do you have any fossil fuel clients?
Yes.
And
yes.
If this agency has that, they will go to another agency.
Well, that's their decision. But yes, in fact, the mechanisms are such that they take an informed choice. And because they have made this commitment, that means they have a much more stringent and robust process in place to screen the agencies that they would be working with. And that's absolutely important because, again, we do not want people who are committing or who are deepening the crisis to use their power and money to shift the focus from them and the accountability from them. And this is one way in which the health community can hold polluters and fossil fuel industry accountable.
You have talked a little bit about it already, but could you maybe expand a little bit on why is the PR and advertising industry, why are you targeting it, and why is it important to build awareness of how they are enabling the fossil fuel industry?
So, I mean, PR and ad agencies play an important role in shaping our behavior, to make us like things that we probably should not be liking. But this is the cultural power that they hold. This is the power of narrative that they hold. So how they represent information can influence the way people see the world. And I mean, one of the reasons why we don't see fossil fuels as health harming is because they have made fossil fuels look desirable.
Community builders.
Community builders, desirable, glamorous, something that people aspire for. And that's the narrative. Because can you imagine the amount of information of death, disease, disability, disruptions that we've documented? If people saw that, do you think people will make the choice of opting for any fossil fuel related products? But in order to systematically obscure our own thinking and behavior, it's the PR and the ad agencies. They are the genius behind making harmful things look glamorous and desirable. So we need to hold them accountable. They shape behaviors. They shape the society and the way we think, where we collectively aspire for things and products. And I'm so inspired to see that the movement to hold fossil fuel ads, for example, accountable, for PR agencies to be more accountable, has begun with campaigns around fossil fuel ad bans, or even campaigns like Break the Fossil Influence. Because if PR agencies' bottom line is money, then their clients are in the best position to influence their behavior and tell them that if they don't correct their ways, the business goes somewhere else. And for the health organizations, it's important because for health community, trust is key. It's their currency. People trust the health community, the health professionals, but if the health professionals in the health community is seen to behave contrary to what they stand for, then that trust erodes, and that is a massive loss for the health community. So in order to keep their trust intact, the health community will have to walk its talk, and it is indeed walking its talk by campaigns like Break the Fossil Influence Commitment. In the past, the health community took stand on health-harming products like tobacco, like alcohol, like sugary beverages and products. For us, fossil fuels is nothing new. It's health-harming. It is dangerous. It affects people's health adversely, and we cannot continue to associate with organizations that greenwash fossil fuel industry or diminish its harm or misrepresent its harm to the public. That's a threat to our credibility.
Thank you. And it also brings us back to some of the solutions that are mentioned in the report, because in the report, one of them is to regulate, limit, and counter fossil fuel industry advertising and disinformation. So you are writing this as a very concrete solution that we need to do to stop.
Yeah. And what this report does in one line, I mean, we've had the moral call for fossil fuel ad bans and challenging fossil fuel industry influence and disinformation. This report provides you the medical evidence to back your call. So this supplements and complements the ongoing movement. For the first time, you have now solid medical evidence to show the harms on the basis of which it's no longer just a moral call, it's the right evidence-based call that one should have of banning fossil fuel ads and limiting fossil fuel industry influence and holding them accountable for disinformation.
Speaking of holding someone accountable, at this point of time, Norway is the number one investor in new oil and gas offshore in the world. And we are, Shweta, you live in India. In Norway, we are 5.5 million people. And we are that country in the world investing most in new oil and gas offshore. And we are saying, well, the rest of the world need our oil. They need our gas because it's better than coal. It's better that we do it because we produce it greener and we are more democratic.
And yet, 100,000 more lives will be lost. How do you justify that?
I think that's a great question to, start rounding this conversation up. I have one question for you, which I got from a friend of mine called Ketan Joshi, who's a smart guy working on greenwashing and energy stuff. And he asks, what would have happened 25 years ago if the climate issue had been primarily framed as a health risk rather than an environmental risk?
Oh my God, that's a very good question. And that's what we are trying to frame the climate issue right now. But had it happened 25 years ago, there would have been much more progress in policy, in decision making. The urgency of transition would have already been met. We would be in a transition and a much more clean energy, healthy, just-based energy choices we would be making. We would be prioritizing clean air, clean water, again, because they are fundamental for people's health. So yeah, a lot of policies I would say would be very different, and the urgency to act would have been much more higher. And again, that goes to say how important health is in the climate discourse and how important it is. I wish it had happened 25 years ago, and but the reality is it has not. But we still have time. Our time for action, our window to act is fast closing. But we can still change that. We can still accelerate just policies if we frame climate issue as a health issue. And the momentum to hold Are governments accountable, companies accountable would be much larger, much stronger, because health, as I said in the beginning, is that connective issue. Is that topic that makes things relatable. It's no longer abstract. It's no longer about carbon and temperature. It's about our lives, our children's lives, our communities' lives. It's about our present and future. So health really is a powerful narrative and must be used across movements to bring the agenda of justice at the forefront.
That's a perfect ending, Shweta. Thank you so much for your time. And I can hear your dogs are making sounds in the background, so I'll let you go to that. And thank you very much. Thank you for this conversation. And I promise to do what I can to raise the health issues regarding fossil fuels in Norway as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure and honor. And let's build more solidarity and go with strength going forward. Thank you.
Oh.